So let's move on to the composition of the audit committee, its experience, its training, its resources. And Bob, I'm going to start with you. We talked about SOX, and SOX really has led to a transformation in some respects of the composition of the audit committee. What have you been most and least impressed with in terms of the changes in the composition of audit committees over the years?
Well, I mean, as you know, I'm not easily impressed. So, no, I think the most impressive piece is the sea change in the level of commitment, understanding, and willingness to take on issues by the audit committee over that time. I mean, to have a deep dive into purchase accounting in the more than 10 years ago would have been a very unusual thing. And I see audit committees that have dedicate almost a whole meeting to risk and really want to dig down and make sure that they understand the nature of the risk, how it fits into the business plan, the strategy of the company. I mean, things have really moved, a couple of standard deviations in the right direction. I think, though, and I'll be a little provocative, but I think in the area of the external audit, there's some challenges. So this would, I guess, go into the least impressed category. There's a few sort of examples I could use. I remember in early days, and I mean, in 2003, 2004, as we were just sort of retooling the relationship, we used to get questions like, do you have adequate budgets and resources to perform a quality audit? We're overseeing this. You're the provider. We have to trust you that you know how to do this. Do you have enough to work with to deliver a quality audit? Those questions, I haven't heard that question in five or 6 years. It's a good question, though. Or the question, if we were to allocate some more resources to the external audit, let's say it's another X hours or another X $1,000, what would you put that to? You're the partner. What are the things that if you had available some more resources, what auditing area, or what would you change, or what would you do with that sort of incremental spend? And I also think, we don't really hear that recently, but I always thought those were very thought-provoking questions and very thoughtful. I also don't see a lot of, I'll just call it keen interest, because there's definitely interest. We, every year, present our audit scope. And generally it's a PowerPoint thing. Here's our coverage, here are the locations we're visiting, here's our team, here's how we're gonna, here's our risk areas, here's our audit response, those kinds of things. We rarely get any sort of dialogue around that. I mean, politely listen to it and so forth. When we prepare, we're always ready for challenges or questions. And it's really kind of been routinized in my view. And I think interest in PCOB inspections has been a challenge. I think interest is moderate at best. It's certainly at its height when that company is this year being inspected. And we always tell clients ahead of time, hey, ABC company's been selected, they're going to be here in 6 weeks, they're going to be on the ground for so long. Those are actually good years because the audit committee is very interested in how that's going. Please report to us any problems. Did you get any comments? Do they tell you whether they're part 1 or part 2? I mean, all the kinds of things you would expect. But it's tough for us to get good agenda time to report our overall firm results, yet to me those are fundamental to the qualifications. And when you do report your firm results, and whether it's part 1 or a list of the issues surfaced, the thoughtful audit committee will say, well, how does that affect our audit? So you've got an issue with documentation, you've got an issue with skepticism. What are the areas that you're retooling or changing, because that observation, if it goes to your whole firm, you must be sensitive to it on the job here. So I don't know. I think things like AS16, I think the board's release on audit committees about PCOB inspections last August has helped a lot. And it helps the audit committee know, without us having to tell them, well, these are the kinds of things we should be asking. So I'm kind of hopeful as we get into 2013 and beyond, we'll have more success trying to educate the audit committee on the whole inspection and being regulated as a profession.
So when you see questions coming through, and Brian, I asked this question of you too, are these, when the good questions come through, are they coming through the financial expert more than anybody else? Do you see the financial expert really making a difference in the audit committee, or is it just the audit committee's heightened awareness of the issues?
Let me start. I think the financial expert is largely tooled to financial reporting and not really tooled to auditing. I still believe that while that was never the focus or the sort of laser focus of Sarbanes, as things have evolved, The firms are spending more time in training and everything else. On the auditing side, less on accounting because there haven't been many new standards, and we're investing most there. So even the financial expert, depending on what their background is, may or may not have a good sense of the audit other than through the experience gained through cumulative service on audit committees. So
Brian, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it comes from the audit committee in general, not from any particular skill set.
Okay.
But I would challenge the point that you made around what types of questions might an audit committee ask? Because, for example, the questions around fees. I link fees to audit scope in the audit plan. And I would expect that when we have gone through the audit plan and you have given me the various characteristics and how you're going to do risk and what your approach to the audit would be, et cetera, and then you say these are the amount of hours it's going to take and this is the fee we're going to give, I'm not going to ask you what would you do with more money. I'm going to say, are you going to be able to deliver a quality audit that we've agreed to at this level and with these hours? And hopefully your answer is yes, and that's, we'll move on from there. But I would expect, to me, a fee is an output. I would expect the bulk of the discussion and the bulk of the challenge to be around the audit scope and the audit plan. That's where I would be.
I think that'd be great. I mean, I just wish we had more back and forth on that, particularly the multinationals where you change somewhat. Where you go on the ground, you always perform audit procedures on the whole company, but whether it's China or South America, in other words, when you have rotating countries, I call them, or omnipresent teams on the ground, I think that's a great place for the audit committee to. So let me understand. Didn't you go there last year? I mean, we're just trying to understand how we think it through. I don't think fees is really should be the focus of the discussion. I think making certain that what gets delivered at the end protects the company, the audit committee, and what I call the durability of the financial statements at the end of the day is the most important element. I'm just saying we don't get a lot of questions on that.
But just to weigh in on this, Michelle, there is some evidence that companies, the clients who pay higher audit fees to their auditors have fewer restatements, less earnings management, and of course more audit hours. Now there's selection issues with all these sorts of things. But the other thing is, back to your point, and audit committees who are paid more tend to pay more fees to their auditor. So
Well,
this
see,
is that connection.
Yeah, that may be the connection, but I may be naive, but I believe that I'm asking, as an audit committee chair, I am asking my auditors to give me a quality audit, period, full stop. I'm not asking them to cut corners. I'm not asking them to, give me a lowball fee, and so therefore the amount of hours they're going to, shave off, an audit team here, and they're going to do this by phone as opposed to in person. And I'm not asking that. I'm asking for a quality audit. Here's the plan. Here's the scope. Tell me what it's going to take to deliver that. I defy you to find an audit committee that says, we're asking for an audit on the cheap. I defy you to say that. And so, therefore, this linkage between what fees are being given and the quality of audit that's being produced, I'm trying to figure out where is that nexus and who is driving that? Because, again, I defy you to find an audit committee that actually says, give me a cheapo audit.
Right.
So why do we get that? Why do we get that disconnect?
I think you're right, Michelle. I think you won't find an audit committee that says, I want the lowest priced audit I can get.
Yeah.
But what you will find is an audit committee that says, tell me what it's going to take to get the job done and what you think is right. And then there's a comparison of the dollars. And there's quite naturally a follow-on question that says, well, this firm says they can do a quality audit for these dollars. You say it's going to take these dollars. We've got to reconcile the two.
And you know what I say? I say audit firms need to get a backbone. And if it takes you more dollars with a certain amount of resource to do that work and to do that work well, then you need to get a backbone and push back on the audit committees and say, this is what it's going to take to give you a good audit. And if you cave, that's your problem.
I can't argue with that because particularly if you're the incumbent and you know, well, I can't use examples. If you know that there are some complexities that any other firm who spend a few days talking to management and look at the financials
Right.
wouldn't have any clue about. What will happen with that other audit, if you choose that, is there's going to be overruns and extra time, which they may or may not
Right.
bill for.
Right.
So, the incumbent auditor should have a very keen sense, having just completed an examination, of why it's, I don't know, 8% higher than people might
Exactly.
expect.
Yeah, and you need to push back.
Yeah.
So briefly, Michelle, in just a minute or two we have left on this topic, talk about the difference between, Bob touched earlier on the mega corporations versus the average mid-sized company. Talk about the difference in the composition that you see because you have experience in both.
I think, and I hate to make generalizations, and I'm going to make one, but I don't really mean to make one. But I think there is a challenge with small and mid-sized firms with getting, I'll call them A-level players onto their boards and onto their audits. I think there are some, and especially there are people that are looking at small companies that they see as potential growth or small companies that have a name. I think there are some things that can attract, some what I call A players to those smaller firms. But in general, I like to say that there is a board out there for everyone, and so you get differing levels of experience, you get differing levels of perhaps education and training around certain topics and expertise that go into a person's background. And I do worry that at perhaps some smaller companies, one, they typically don't have large audit committees, and so they have smaller numbers because they may have smaller numbers on their boards. And so you don't have that robustness because I'll take one of my audit committees. We have 5 members on our audit committee, and I know that's on the high end. Some audit committees only have 3, and if one person is absent, then you have 2. And so it's hard to get a lot of robust conversations when you don't have that level. If you don't have the level of background and expertise coming in the door, and if you don't have the number of people that can bring their divergent experience and expertise to the conversation.
Right. So, Mark, with all that as backdrop, talk to us about research that touches on the composition of the audit committee versus...
Okay, I mentioned the characteristics that are looked at, and you can sort of look at this research into two areas, two groups. So inputs to the audit process, and the idea is whether or not audit committee characteristics drive the inputs, the kind of auditors, the amount of fees you pay the auditor, that sort of thing, whether or not that is associated with high quality inputs, and whether or not high quality or effective audit committees are associated with high quality outputs. And I think kind of what we're talking about here is the output part. That's the vast majority of this research. And there's just lots of evidence that at least audit committee independence and expertise are associated with lots of high quality outputs, like fewer restatements, accruals that are less likely to be managed towards benchmarks, more conservative accounting, auditors who are more willing to give going concern opinions, fewer auditor resignations, and the stock market reacts positively to companies who appoint experts to their audit committees, at least before Sarbanes-Oxley. And there's a small controversy about what kind of expertise, but generally speaking, this research finds that financial expertise related to accounting, hardcore, people with CPA experience tend to be the group here that seems to drive this. This is consistent with companies replacing audit committee members, more likely to replace audit committee members if they have restatements. So the audit committee's got a big incentive to do this. There's also, you mentioned large audit committees, frequent meetings, and even legal experts on the audit committee, generally speaking, are also associated with higher financial reporting quality. Interestingly, how the audit committee members are paid also seems to make a difference. So audit committee members with relatively more short-term stock options, those companies tend to have more restatements. Who chooses the audit committee members also seems to matter. So audit committee members who are chosen by nominating committees that are less independent tend to have CEOs on the audit committee. Those companies tend to have more restatements. And finally, in addition to increasing the client's incentives and competencies to fulfill a higher audit quality. Audit committees also have a responsibility, and I think you mentioned this a little bit, to shield the auditor from management's influence. And there's some evidence that consistent with that, in that more independent audit committees tend to have fewer auditor dismissals after receiving going concern opinions. So to summarize, there's lots of evidence that these characteristics matter, particularly independence and expertise, to a lesser extent some of these other things. Going forward, a major problem from the research side with this literature is most of this research tends to be, not all of it of course, but tends to be associations, not necessarily causality. That's something that permeates all social science research, and there's no, at the end of the day, there's no real solution to that problem, but it's something that researchers should be mindful to.
Thank you, Mark. All right.